This is an instance where women, non-governmental organizations, did what governmental organizations failed to do, even though there was sufficient evidence. And that is an opportunity to set the record straight.
When the Second World War ended, although the Allied forces knew that there were women who were kept in sexual slavery, patriarchal standards dominated, and crimes against women were just hidden.
사죄받고 저한테 저걸 할 거야. 난 돈 받을 거야. 저 때는 사죄.
通行中の皆さん、しかし日本政府は未だに法的責任を日本政府は戦争犯罪を認め
We are marching on the street. There's no time, it's a time. I mean, they are already old.
These women were all in their 80s when they started to come out. They were sick and they were dying. One of the comfort women said, I'm coming out because I need to get my soul back before I die.
Litigation was being commenced both in the Japanese courts and in courts abroad, and essentially was getting nowhere.
By 1998, we were really frustrated that nothing legal was moving.
Many of the women had come forward. They would talk about the horrific experiences. Academics would then talk about why those were breaches of international law. Activists would talk about what they wanted to do, but there didn't seem to be a change in the international community. And the women realized that they were ever going to have some sense of formal justice, that organizing a People's Tribunal would be the best way to go.
The People's Tribunal is created by and for civil society. It's an assertion that law is not just for states, it's also for people. And in the case of this tribunal, women's civil society.
This idea came from Japanese activist and journalist Yayoi Matsui.
Yayoi Matsui came to me and said, "Inday, we have to organize a war crimes tribunal." And it's really a tall order.
She was very aware that we are perpetrator country. That's the reason why we should do.
I said to Yayoi immediately, "Sure, why not?" Okay. Just like that, no question. But that is how I think history is made. You don't ask too many questions. You just say, okay, let's do it.
I was asking Yayoi after the tribunal, how come you could get such a high-profile judges and chief prosecutors?
I'm a civil rights lawyer who became an international judge. I went to law school in the turbulent 1960s in the United States for the express purpose of being a civil rights lawyer. So this gave me an opportunity to kind of renew my passion in my youth, as well as perhaps filling some gaps that I knew existed in the state of international criminal law at that time.
I decided to join it myself as being a descendant of a slave. And everyone in the United States who's a descendant of a slave is more than likely a descendant of a female slave who has been sexually enslaved. So for me, there was a very natural connection on a personal level, in addition to, this was really the area of my professional legal interest at that time.
One of the reasons I was willing to be involved in the tribunal is that there was this sense in which Japan would never truly admit what had happened during the Second World War. And it just seemed like doing something that was more formal might have a greater impact.
I got a phone call asking me if I would be involved and if I would consider becoming one of the panel of judges. The very fact that this was an initiative of a number of different women's organizations across Asia And so that it was very much coming from them. I mean, it was a huge honor to be asked by such people.
They were looking for a man because they had 3 women already. I was working with Kenya Human Rights Commission, where we were doing fantastic work on women's rights, gay rights. They asked me if I would, like to serve. And I said, yes, I was ready.
The legal experts and scholars were what we now know and call allies. This was the start of my sort of human rights career. And just looking over the 20 years, this for me was one of the most incredible moments when civil society women leaders and activists, when legal scholars, when legal experts from around the globe, everybody came to Tokyo.
We called it the Women's International War Crimes Tribunal. It was led by women. It was about the issue of women, It was not a Yugoslavia War Crimes Tribunal or a Rwanda War Crimes Tribunal. It was a women's tribunal that addressed one core issue, and that is sexual slavery, rape, mass rape, sexual violence, forced pregnancy in wartime.
One of the things that really set this particular People's Tribunal apart was the formal nature of the proceedings. That really came from the women. They felt that this was the only way that they would feel that they had justice. If something that had that very formal nature to it came to the conclusion that what had happened to them was a crime.
Over in Tokyo, Japanese war criminals faced their trial, led by
We lived in certain myths about what happened in World War II. And if it didn't get to the Tokyo Tribunal, it didn't exist. Of course, we don't remember what was absent and what by all means could have and should have been there.
The framing of the tribunal was as a continuation of the International Military Tribunal for the Far East.
We took a decision to only use the law that was applicable in 1945 to show that this very evidence at that time, in 1945-46, could have been adjudicated. The forum existed, the crimes had been committed, and could have been the basis of a conviction.
Yes, there will be high military officials who are named in the indictments, as well as the Emperor Hirohito.
Organizing the Women's International War Crimes Tribunal was really one of a kind.
They worked across 10 countries to find the teams of prosecutors.
In order to work together among 10 countries, of course, there were lots of very tense moments.
You think about lawyers from 10 different jurisdictions discussing with one another exactly how this is going to work. You can just imagine the discussions that took place.
I could see them struggling and then achieving the ability to work harmoniously. And the fact that North and South Korea decided to become one team. I mean, that was just like, my gosh, and I was there.
I can't stress enough the amount of work that went into this by
historians and researchers digging into the military archives till 8 o'clock in the evening.
Everybody was working all the time. So there were at times so many different legal advisors, legal assistants, legal scholars, and
diaries, as well as additional war documents. Other people were searching archives and in London.
There were hundreds of people behind the scene who worked towards that.
Everybody was able to work through it and, of course, come to an agreement about what the charter for the tribunal would be and an agreement that it would take place in Tokyo.
As you have in many situations of mass atrocities, you have populists and people who deny that those atrocities ever took place.
We were certainly very aware of a great deal of hostility in Tokyo. We had to be careful going out. I had to be careful going into the tribunal each day.
Were right-wing people demonstrating outside of the venue. Comfort women were prostitutes. Go back to your country, etc. All kinds of hate speech and harassment.
There were people outside not only protesting, but there were threats of harm.
We knew we weren't welcome. And that was the pleasure of that struggle. I felt like I always feel when I'm in a demonstration, you are emboldened, okay? Because you feel this is a cause you can die for.
Holding it in not just Japan, but in Tokyo, in a city that was the city of empire, was courageous, it was brave, it was truth to power. And I think for the survivors and for the women who came forward, it was a means of saying, I am here, I exist.
The opening reminded me of the Tadich trials opening because of the media, and the number of attendees.
Kudan Kaikan Hall holds 1,500 people. The third tier of that hall was filled with the international media.
The testimonies of the comfort women were really compelling. It was beyond measure to listen for each stories of the women coming from different 9 countries with almost the same story of sexual slavery, how they were abducted, how they were taken from their houses, how they were brought to the Japanese garrison, how they saw their members of their family or their fathers and mothers being killed in front of them and then being dragged to the comfort station and being repeatedly raped every day.
We are joined by country prosecutors. Might I ask them to
I've
enter their
seen 9
appearances?
country teams bring forward their individual cases. And Tina and I, as co-prosecutors, we were always on the stage. And so we could see just the buildup of the evidence legally and emotionally. The audience was hearing the culmination of the evidence for the first time. They might have known about one woman or one incident or one country, but all of a sudden, it's like the puzzle pieces were just falling together and the mosaic was being formed. And so when the judges brought their judgment forward, they kind of handed us back the package of rights that had been sought.
Your Honors, I would submit that Emperor Hirohito might use many justifications for the roads to the comfort station. They all lead to slavery and rape, and they all lead him to your judicial wisdom, which means a pronouncement of guilt.
When the judgment was handed down, recognizing that sexual slavery was a crime against humanity. And then the second part of that was the recognition that Emperor Hirohito was responsible for that crime.
Hirohito guilty of crimes against
I can remember where I was sitting in the hall. I can remember the faces of the survivors. The audience suddenly started clapping and shouting, and people stood up in their chairs, and all the comfort women stood up and were celebrating.
The comfort women went on stage and started crying. We all cried. It was almost like we achieved justice. We really did. They achieved justice. We too felt we achieved justice. I mean, I remember that stage when all the women were crying, and really crying, hugging each other and waving and saying, yeah, at last, now, justice is done to us. We have achieved justice in our lifetime before we die. I mean, even Patricia Sellers, we were all crying and hugging each other.
And it's not as if we didn't know what the verdict was probably going to be. I mean, that's what we've been working on. But, I mean, your heart was still there the whole time. And so this is when the heart finally had a chance to kind of speak and release. And so I remember that moment as being just all-consuming.
That was televised. That went global. That was a moment of shame. Finally, not their shame. Finally, shame that globally, this was a failure of accountability on a global scale.
This is the judgment that was handed down. Have you ever seen this? Look. This judgment looks, and purposely looks, very similar to the judgments that were issued at the Yugoslav Tribunal at the time, of which I have tens of others. It's a solid, substantive judgment that each of the women received in The Hague, and I remember them clasping it to their breast.
All rise. The judgment was handed down at The Hague in December 2001. That in itself says quite a lot.
It was never done before, a group of women from 9 countries come together and said, this is sexual violence in wartime. This happened 50 years ago and still happening today. What is the international community doing about it?
We didn't tell him because we wanted to speak Japan.
Given my experience as a human rights activist, I knew, that was the beginning of the struggle for the justice of these women.
Japanese media was very much silenced afterwards. We tried the Emperor Hirohito and announced guilty. After that, it's more kind of backlash becomes much stronger. Politicians intervened public broadcasting program before the program showed. The portion that Emperor Hirohito was guilty and was deleted. The testimony of the former soldiers deleted. The survivors from each country deleted. They only left Korean women only, meaning they're trying to make the issue between Korea and Japan, not something broad.
What happened and what has happened since then, hasn't surprised me. It's the impunity of ruling groups and states and governments in this world.
Yayori had been in hiding for about a month because of the threat from the right wing, threatening phone calls, and then, we will bomb you, etc. Very, dangerous threats.
That right-wing movement has continued. There's also been years of a government that's been absolutely unsympathetic to this issue.
Looking back, of course, 9/11 happens, 9 months later. That was very much an end to that early optimism of the 1990s and a very changed environment as we then moved into the new century.
In recent times, we have seen around the world a pushback against gender equality and women's rights.
Moving on 2 decades now, a very big pushback against human rights, against women's human rights, against women human rights defenders.
This issue that we tried to resolve at the Women's Tribunal 20 years ago, it's still happening. So without the common concerted efforts, this will not go away.
It is not over. The fight continues till today.
What some people may consider to have been a failure can be a positive because it shows the inaction in the face of an abundance of evidence that is recounted. It shows the continuing failure of the government of Japan to do what it should do, what it can do, and still.
Any freedom, any rights that we are enjoying currently is the result of the struggle of our sisters, our predecessors, our parents' generation.
For every normative framework that is being recognized within the United Nations, there is a movement of women behind it that push for it and fought for it and talk about it. It was not like the United Nations one day said, let's talk about women, peace, and security. No, that never happened. It was the women activists like us out there in the picket lines, putting the rally, talking to the women who were victims of sexual violence that pushed the United Nations to recognize women, peace, and security.
In order to go forward, we need to remember, we need to celebrate what we have achieved so far.
We defined interpretations of humanitarian law and international law and human rights law. We gendered the whole framework.
It also talks to what justice should look like. It centered victims within that process. And the International Criminal Court has gone on to do that.
Our judgment, the Women's Tribunal judgment, is now being used by the ICC as one of the most gender judgments ever written.
The judges continue that such gender blindness in international peace processes contributes to the continuing culture of impunity for crimes perpetrated against women in armed conflict.
It's a beautiful judgment. It is the most gendered interpretation of humanitarian law and international law. It redefined the notion of what would constitute accountability, compensation, and reparation in wartime.
The International Women's Tribunal kind of pulled the curtain back to show what's always been there, but has been invisible in our legal jurisprudence. And once you open those curtains and see it, there's no going back. There's no going back. You can only go forward and build upon it.